When trouble hits, and it always does, right? Whether it's sickness, anxiety, or maybe the heavy weight of your own sin, where do you even begin to turn? Well, Psalm 6 gives us this incredibly raw and honest blueprint for how to bring our biggest problems straight to God. Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today, we're going to take a close look at Psalm 6 to really understand how a believer can walk through some serious hardship with faith. And right out of the gate, the psalm hits us with this big question. When affliction shows up, whether it's coming from the outside or from deep within, what are we supposed to do? What's the right response?
Right, and David's lament here, it's not just some historical diary entry. It's meant to be a template for us. One commentator really nailed it. He said, if you're afflicted or you're sick, this is your song. It's meant to be prayed, to be lived out.
So let's get into it. The psalm kicks off with David just laying out all his grievances before God. And his complaint is really threefold. It touches his body, his mind, and what his enemies are doing to him. Yeah, he's getting hit from 3 different directions at once. He's dealing with some kind of physical sickness, but that's made even worse by this mental anguish that's all tied up in his own sin. And, as if that's not enough, his enemies are kicking him while he's down, just mocking him in his weakness. And this is a really key point David makes. He talks about this deep physical pain, saying his bones are vexed. But then he says his soul is sorely vexed. For him, that internal spiritual trouble was so much heavier than any physical pain he was going through. And you can just feel how intense this grief is. This wasn't for show. It was a private, secret sorrow. With that sin pressing down on his conscience, he felt the displeasure of God so heavily that he literally wept until his bed was soaked through. So you gotta ask, what's driving this kind of grief? It's not just his circumstances. It's actually rooted in these 2 huge spiritual fears, a fear of God's wrath and a fear of being silenced forever by death. And this is so important to get. David's number 1 fear wasn't the sickness itself. It was this feeling that he was under God's anger. That was what the commentators call the wormwood and the gall. It was the bitterest part of the whole ordeal, what made it almost unbearable. His second big fear was death. And not just dying, but the end of his ability to praise God. He was terrified of what's called the second death, that final separation from God where there's no remembrance of him, no praise at all. Okay, so after David has poured out all his complaints and all his fears, this is where the psalm makes a huge shift. He doesn't just stay in despair. He moves into petition, actively pleading his case before God. And look at what he asks for. He's not vague about it. He asks for mercy, for healing, and for God to return. Basically, to receive him back into favor. He wants way more than just relief from pain. He's after pardon for his sin and a full reconciliation with God. But this right here, this is the main thing he asks for. It gets right to the heart of what he's really afraid of. He's saying he can handle God's chastening, his correction. What he can't bear is God's hot displeasure. He's begging God to take the wrath out of the discipline. And then, after he's made his case to God, the whole tone of the psalm just flips. It's sudden, it's dramatic. The man who was groaning and weeping is now speaking with absolute confidence. And you can't miss his change in tone. He's so sure now. He says it like it's a fact, and he even repeats it twice, almost triumphantly, "The Lord hath heard." He is completely certain that his prayer has been accepted. So where did that confidence come from? It probably wasn't some audible voice from heaven. It was an internal assurance, a work of God's grace happening in his heart. He realized that his very tears were a form of prayer, a loud voice that the God of mercy could hear. And this newfound confidence, it changes things right away. With his sorrow turning into joy, David gets a new boldness, not just toward God, but toward his enemies and even towards sin itself. And here's his powerful command. Once his own fears are dealt with, he can draw a clear line in the sand between himself and sinners. He tells all the workers of iniquity to just get away from him. And this is where things get really interesting, because there's a clear line from this to the New Testament. David's words here are a foreshadowing of Christ. Commentators point out that Jesus uses this very same language from David to describe the final judgment, when he will say, "Depart from me, all you workers of iniquity." All right, so let's pull all this together and look at what it means for us. The way this psalm is structured, the whole progression of it, it really gives us a clear model for how we should handle our own times of trouble. The pattern David leaves for us is pretty straightforward. We can bring our raw, unfiltered complaints to God. We should learn to see our own sin as the real problem, even more so than physical pain. We should plead based on God's mercy, not on anything we've done, and we can trust that He hears us, even our weeping, which then gives us the strength to stand firm against sin.
So we'll leave you with this to think about. How can this pattern of honest complaint, of heartfelt petition, and then confident trust, how can that really change the way you face your own suffering?